The sun hung low over Thebes, casting the palace gardens in molten gold, where the scent of lotus flowers floated thick upon the river breeze. Hidden between towering papyrus stalks and marble colonnades, Lady Asetnefer moved like a whisper in linen robes of ivory, her dark braided hair crowned with tiny beads that caught the light. Her heart pounded in her chest, each step carrying the weight of forbidden hope. Beneath the shade of a date palm, Kamen waited, a soldier's stillness about him, but his dark eyes flickered with something no discipline could cage. He wore only a simple kilt, his bronze skin glistening with the remnants of a day's labor, and when he saw her, the hard lines of his face softened as if the world itself had gentled. Asetnefer hesitated for a breath, listening for the steps of servants, the keen eyes of the palace guards, the invisible chains of expectation that clung tighter to her than any gold jewelry. But then she crossed the threshold between duty and desire, slipping into the shelter of the palm's embrace, where Kamen's arms folded her against him with a hunger softened by reverence. "You should not be here," he whispered against her hair, the words trembling between warning and plea. "Neither should you," she answered, her fingers tracing the edge of the leather strap across his chest, feeling the life thrumming beneath it. Somewhere beyond the hedges, the sound of sandals scuffed on stone, and a woman's laughter rang sharp, a reminder that even paradise here had ears. Asetnefer pulled away, her hands reluctant, her eyes burning with the knowledge that each meeting was a thread weaving a noose around their necks. "Just a moment more," Kamen said, voice rough with longing, and she yielded, resting her forehead against his. In that fleeting second, they were not priest-daughter and low-born guard, not lawbreaker and betrayer, but simply man and woman, two souls adrift in a river stronger than any decree. The call of a temple horn broke the spell, echoing across the gardens with grim finality. Duty called, as it always did, dragging them back to the lives that would tear them apart. "Go," she whispered, a queen in her command, though her heart shattered with it. He stepped back, his face carved from sorrow, and disappeared among the pillars with a soldier's practiced stealth. Alone again, Asetnefer turned toward the palace, her slender form swallowed by the long shadows of sunset, unaware that hidden among the reeds, unseen eyes had witnessed everything, and already, whispers stirred like serpents in the grass, hissing of betrayal, of scandal, of a love that would soon become her greatest crime. The palace woke early with the sun, its whitewashed walls blazing under the newborn light, but Asetnefer moved through its halls as though a storm cloud clung to her. Servants bowed low as she passed, their eyes respectfully averted, but their lips pressed tight against the words they dared not speak aloud. She could feel it, an invisible net weaving itself tighter with every step she took. By the lotus pools, the laundresses paused their chatter when she approached, offering smiles too brittle to be believed. In the kitchens, the spice merchants lowered their voices, their glances sharp and cutting. Asetnefer kept her head high. The daughter of a priest could not flinch before rumor, but inside her stomach twisted with dread. She thought of Kamen's touch still lingering on her skin, of the way the world had fallen away when his arms had circled her. Was it possible that a single stolen moment could leave such a stain on the air? By mid-morning, she found herself summoned to the great court, an unusual request that tightened her chest with unease. The great court, with its towering statues of past kings and painted columns depicting the gods' judgments, was a place of ceremony, not casual meetings. Her sandals whispered across the floor as she entered, the vast space cool and shadowed despite the blaze outside. Waiting at the base of the colossal Osirian pillars stood her father, High Priest Paheri, his figure rigid in his white robes, his staff of office clutched tightly in his fist. He said no word of greeting, only regarded her with a gaze carved from stone. Beside him loomed Commander Menkaura, his leather armor gleaming, a man whose loyalty to law was only rivaled by his hunger for favor. "Daughter," Paheri said at last, voice cold as the Nile's deep waters. "There are whispers that have found their way even to the ears of the gods." Asetnefer lowered her eyes, knowing denial would only stoke the flames. "I have served Maat," she said quietly, invoking the goddess of truth, in word and deed. Commander Menkora's lip curled in a sneer almost too faint to notice. And yet, he said, truth itself seems stained by the company you keep. Asetnefer's heart pounded like a drumbeat of doom. She realized, too late, that love was never hidden for long beneath the sun's unblinking eye. Somewhere, someone had seen. Somewhere, a word had been dropped like a stone into the waters, and the ripples now lapped at the very walls of her life. The court will decide your fate, her father said, turning away as if he could no longer bear the sight of her. Left standing alone beneath the impassive faces of stone gods, Asetnefer understood that the tides had turned against her, and that the hand which once caressed her cheek so tenderly might now be the only one left willing to reach for her in a world determined to cast her away. The court assembled beneath the open sky, where the gods themselves could bear witness. The pillars of the judgment hall rose like spears against the brilliant noon, their carved images of Horus and Isis casting long shadows over the gathered elite. Asetnefer stood alone at the center of the dais, her linen dress clinging to her body in the relentless heat, her head bowed, her heart a stone lodged in her chest. Around her, courtiers whispered behind painted fans, their faces bright with the cruel delight of watching the mighty fall. High Priest Paheri presided over the tribunal, his expression a mask of pious sorrow, but she saw the iron beneath it. Commander Menkora stood rigid at his side, arms crossed over his chest, a vulture hungry for the scent of blood. They had summoned no commoners to this trial. There would be no mercy found here, only the cold, perfumed breath of judgment. The charges were read aloud, each word striking like a lash across her soul, consorting with a common guard, defiling her sacred bloodline, bringing shame upon the temple of Amun. At last, the murmuring crowd fell silent as Kamen was dragged forward, bound in rough ropes, his face bruised but defiant. He met her gaze without flinching, a silent vow passing between them even as the court pressed upon them like a collapsing sky. "Do you deny your guilt?" Paheri intoned, voice heavy with ritual. Asetnefer raised her chin, the sun catching in her tear-rimmed eyes. "I deny that love is guilt," she said, her voice clear, carrying across the stones like a prayer against the end of the world. A murmur rippled through the assembly, but Paheri showed no sign he heard. "The gods demand purity," Menkora sneered, stepping forward. "You have chosen disgrace. You will pay the price." The judgment came swiftly, as she knew it would. Kamen, stripped of his rank, would be imprisoned until the gods deemed his debt repaid, a sentence that meant death by neglect. Asetnefer, a daughter of noble blood, could not be slain by ordinary hands. Instead, she would be cast into exile beyond the Black Dunes, where no law held sway and no soul returned. She felt the world sway beneath her feet, but she did not fall. She would not give them that satisfaction. Kamen struggled against his bonds, roaring her name, but the guards struck him down, the sound of the blow echoing across the marble like a death knell. As they dragged her away, Asetnefer looked once more into the faces of her accusers, and for the first time she saw them not as gods among men but as frightened children, desperate to appease powers they could not even comprehend. They feared love because love was the one thing their laws could not tame. And as the sun bore down without pity, she vowed that even if the desert swallowed her bones, her heart would remain unbroken. The road to exile began with ritual, for even in their cruelty, the priests demanded ceremony. In the cold silence of the temple's inner sanctum, Lady Asetnefer knelt before her father, her forehead pressed against the black-veined limestone floor where generations had prayed for favor, not mercy. The sacred torches flickered in their sconces, their smoke curling toward the painted ceiling where the gods gazed down with impassive eyes. High Priest Paheri loomed above her, his hands hidden within the folds of his spotless linen robe, the staff of Ma'at held upright like a scepter of judgment. His face was an unreadable mask, but Asetnefer no longer searched for compassion there. That man, the father who had once lifted her to his shoulders to watch the river's flood, who had whispered stories of the stars, was gone, replaced by a servant of order. "You have broken the bonds of your station," Paheri said, each word falling like a blade. "You have stained the blood of our house, and by the law of Maat, you are cast out." Asetnefer raised her eyes slowly, seeing not a father, but a pillar of stone that no plea could soften. "I loved," she said, her voice low but unshaken, "and that is my only crime." A flicker, almost too small to see, passed over Paheri's features, the briefest crack in the marble. "Love," he said bitterly, "is the first betrayal. It is the root of all defiance." He gestured, and two temple guards stepped forward, their faces hidden beneath jackal-headed masks. In their hands, they carried the symbols of her banishment: a coarse black robe, a clay water jar, and a staff marked with the glyphs of the condemned. No jewelry, no sandals, no protection. She would walk into the Black Dunes not as a daughter of Thebes, but as a nameless exile stripped of all that had once defined her. Paheri placed the black robe before her, and for a moment, the air itself seemed to hold its breath. "Take it," he said. "You must leave before Ra rises again." Asetnefer reached out with steady fingers and lifted the robe, feeling its weight settle onto her soul like a final goodbye. She rose to her feet, every movement a silent act of defiance, of dignity clutched from the ashes of disgrace. As the guards flanked her, leading her from the sacred halls that had once been her world, she heard her father speak once more, so soft it was almost a prayer. "May the desert judge you more kindly than I." She did not turn back. The gods had seen fit to cast her into the teeth of the endless sands, but they had not yet seen the fire she carried within, a flame that no exile, no decree, no priest could extinguish. The gates of Thebes yawned open at dawn, their ancient stones cold with the dew of a world that no longer welcomed her. Asetnefer stood at the threshold, the black robe clinging to her like a funeral shroud, the clay jar heavy in her trembling hands, the desert stretching before her like an endless, waiting mouth. Behind her, the city stirred to life, the cries of merchants and the clatter of donkey carts rising into the morning air, oblivious to the woman they had cast out like refuse. The guards said nothing as they shoved her forward, their spears gleaming in the first light. She staggered once, catching herself before she could fall, and took her first step beyond the protection of the walls, into exile. The Black Dunes rose in the distance, a broken spine of hills and shifting sands where no crops grew and no songs were sung. Legend said the dunes were cursed, that they swallowed the living whole, leaving only bones bleached white by Ra's merciless gaze. Asetnefer did not believe in curses. She believed in the cruelty of men and the coldness of gods who watched and did nothing. She walked with the sun rising at her back, her bare feet burning against the stones, her water jar sloshing with every step, a mocking reminder that her life now depended on how far she could carry it. By midday, the city was a memory behind her, the fertile fields a blur swallowed by the shimmering heat. The wind picked up, dragging fingers of sand across her path, tearing at her robe, her skin, her will. Her throat burned, but she rationed her sips, each drop of water precious as gold. By sunset, her legs quivered with exhaustion, her lips cracked and bleeding. She crested a low ridge, praying for a sign, an acacia tree, a trickle of green. But there was only more sand, rippling like the skin of a vast, sleeping beast. Alone beneath the wide, bleeding sky, Asetnefer sank to her knees, her jar falling from numb fingers and shattering on the rocks, her precious water bleeding into the thirsty earth. For a moment, despair clutched her so tightly she could not breathe. She had been cast into a grave before her body had even died. But then, somewhere deep inside her battered soul, a voice rose up, fierce and unyielding, the voice of the woman who had dared to love in a world that forbade it. She dragged herself upright, her body screaming in protest, and began to walk again, leaving behind the shards of the life that had betrayed her. Night fell swiftly over the dunes, the stars igniting one by one, silent witnesses to her struggle. And far away, Unseen by her, another figure moved across the sands, tracking her footsteps, carrying with him a vow sworn not to gods or kings, but to the only truth that mattered now: love. Kamen moved like a shadow through the outer alleys of Thebes, each step a silent act of treason. Stripped of his armor, hunted by the men he once called brothers, he wore only the plain linen of a commoner and the unyielding purpose of a man with nothing left to lose. Word had reached him of Asetnefer's exile, carried in whispers and fearful glances, as though even speaking her name might draw the wrath of the gods. Yet Kamen feared no gods now, only the silence that would fill his life if he did nothing. Beneath the cover of darkness, he had slipped through the barracks, gathering what little he could: an old waterskin, a battered knife, a cloak the color of sand. He had no plan beyond this: to find her, to tear her back from the jaws of the desert if it cost him breath, blood, or soul. The city gates were no longer open to him, guarded by men who had once fought beside him, but who would now bind him in chains for daring to defy the court. Yet Kamen knew Thebes better than most. He knew the cracks in its walls, the forgotten wells, the secret ways used by smugglers and slaves. Before the first call of the dawn horn, he slipped through a half-buried servant's tunnel beneath the east gate, emerging into the barren wilds like a spirit reborn. The desert greeted him with an iron hand, the air thick with heat even before the sun crowned the horizon. He wrapped his cloak tightly, shielding his face, and set his feet upon the sand, following the faint traces Asetnefer would have left: the shallow prints of bare soles, the shattered remains of a clay jar, the delicate scatter of black robe threads torn by the wind. Every sign was a dagger to his heart, a testament to the suffering she endured because of him, because of a kiss they had dared to believe could survive the weight of a world built to crush it. As the sun rose higher, Kamen stumbled once, then again, his breath ragged, his skin scorched. But he did not slow. He could see her in his mind. Her proud chin lifted against the judgment of the court, her eyes burning not with fear but with defiance. He would not let the desert claim her. He would not let their love be a forgotten whisper buried beneath the sands. When night fell, and the stars spilled like rivers across the black sky, Kamen pressed forward, a lone figure in a sea of darkness, a man who had forsaken all titles, all commands, all fear, except the fear of losing her. Somewhere ahead, across the dunes and the broken stones, Asetnefer fought to survive. And Kamen, the guard who would not bow to kings or gods, would fight to find her. The desert stretched out like a living thing, endless and unmerciful, each dune a wave in a sea of gold and death. Asetnefer stumbled through the blazing sands, her legs raw with blisters, her mouth a parched hollow that could barely form prayer or curse. The black robe hung from her shoulders in tatters, a banner of her fall from grace, flapping weakly in the furnace winds. Around her, the world blurred into a haze of shimmering heat, the sky a pitiless dome of pale fire. Twice she fell, her hands tearing against stones half buried beneath the drifts. Twice she forced herself up, driven by something deeper than flesh, deeper than fear, the stubborn ember of life that refused to die, even when stripped of everything else. When the sun sank at last and the sky bled into violet, Asetnefer collapsed atop a ridge, her vision swimming, the stars wheeling in drunken spirals above. She had no water left, no strength left, no name left. Only the sound of the wind remained, keening through the dunes like the mourning of forgotten gods. She closed her eyes, ready to surrender at last to the great silence, when a new sound reached her ears, a low, desperate call carried on the breath of the night. Her name, whispered, shouted, dragged from a throat raw with exhaustion. Asetnefer stirred, blinking against the dark, and through the wavering veil of heat and sand, she saw him, Kamen. Staggering toward her, a broken sword clutched in one hand, his cloak torn, his face nearly unrecognizable beneath the layers of dust and sweat. But his eyes, oh, his eyes were the same, burning, unyielding, alive. She tried to rise, but the world tilted violently, and she fell again. Kamen dropped to his knees beside her, gathering her into his arms with a groan of pure agony and relief. His touch was rough, trembling, as though he could not believe she was real and not some cruel mirage sent by the desert to torment him. "I found you," he breathed against her hair, his voice breaking. "I found you." Asetnefer wanted to speak, to say his name, to tell him he had saved her with more than just his hands, that he had saved her heart from dying alone. But her throat gave no words, only a sob that tore from her chest like the breaking of a dam. Kamen lifted her carefully, shielding her body with his own from the stinging winds, and set his steps toward the western stars, where ancient rumors spoke of an oasis hidden beyond the reach of kings. In his arms, Asetnefer drifted between darkness and light, but somewhere deep within her, a spark flared anew. In this land without thrones, without temples, without chains, love was not a crime. It was the only law that mattered. The oasis rose from the desert like a dream wrestled from the jaws of death, a hidden cradle of life where palms swayed against the deep blue sky and waters shimmered like molten glass. Kamen stumbled into it with Asetnefer cradled in his arms, both of them little more than ghosts, shaped by will alone. He waded into the cool shallows, letting the sacred water kiss her feet, her legs, her bruised hands. She stirred against him, her eyes fluttering open, and, for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, Asetnefer drank from a world that did not seek to destroy her. They stayed there, half submerged, for what could have been hours or only heartbeats, too broken to speak, too alive to let go. When the worst of their thirst was soothed, Kamen carried her to the shade of a date palm, setting her down with the gentleness of a man holding something more precious than his own soul. Wordlessly, he gathered reeds and fronds, building a shelter as best he could with the trembling hands of the nearly dead. Asetnefer watched him, her heart breaking anew, not from sorrow this time, but from the unbearable tenderness of it. This man who had abandoned everything, who had crossed the desert and defied gods and kings alike, just to find her. Days blurred into nights and back again. Kamen hunted small game and gathered fruits from the oasis trees, his body growing leaner, harder, as he worked to build a life out of nothing. Asetnefer, once adorned in gold and fine linens, wove baskets from reeds and fashioned coverings from woven palm leaves, each act a quiet rebellion against the life that had been stripped from her. They spoke little at first, words feeling too heavy, too small to contain all that had passed between them. But in the gentle tending of wounds, in the silent passing of food, in the shared breath of sleep beneath the open stars, a new kingdom was born. A kingdom without walls, without laws, without thrones. Only love reigned here, raw and sacred and stronger than any decree. One night, as the stars spilled silver across the black velvet sky, Kamen sat beside her at the edge of the water, their shoulders brushing, their reflections rippling together in the pool. "I have nothing to offer you," he said, his voice rough with fear and awe. "Only my life." Asetnefer turned to him, her face illuminated by the soft glow of the heavens, and for the first time since the gardens of Thebes, she smiled, not the smile of a lady trained to please, but the smile of a woman who had survived the breaking of the world. "Your life," she whispered, "is everything." And there, beneath the wide, merciful sky, they made their vow, not before gods, not before men, but before the only witnesses who mattered, the stars, the water, and their own unbreakable hearts. The oasis had given them life, but it could not shield them from the past. On the edge of the water one dusky evening, as Kamen sharpened a crude spear, and Asetnefer wove another basket from river reeds, a sharp unease prickled the air. The birds had fallen silent. The wind shifted, carrying not just the dry breath of the dunes, but something heavier, something human. Kamen rose to his feet slowly, every muscle coiled tight, his hand closing around the hilt of his battered blade. Asetnefer followed his gaze to the ridgeline, where against the bruised sky a dark figure on horseback appeared, then another, then two more, shadows of the world they had fled. Commander Menkara had not forgotten them. He had not forgiven the stain their defiance left upon the court, and now he had come to finish what the desert had failed to do. Kamen moved quickly, pulling Asetnefer behind the cover of a fallen palm. His mind raced. There was no army to call, no walls to hide behind, only the wilderness and the will to survive. Asetnefer gripped his arm, her fingers fierce despite the fear he saw in her eyes. She did not speak. She did not need to. They had survived too much to waste breath on despair. The riders approached with the slow, cruel patience of predators savoring the inevitability of the kill. Menkora led them, his armor dark against the fading light, a grim shadow of the kingdom they had left behind. "Return with us," his voice rang out, harsh and commanding. "You may yet die with some shred of dignity." Kamen stepped forward from the trees, his battered blade raised, his body shielding Asetnefer from view. "We have no place among your thrones," he called back, voice steady as the earth. Menkora laughed, a sound without warmth. "You think love is enough to build a kingdom? The desert will devour you. I offer you mercy, one last chance." Kamen did not answer with words. He answered with a roar of defiance and a charge fueled by every wrong he had endured, every lash of shame they had dared to heap upon Asetnefer's name. The clash was brutal, swift, and desperate. Kamen fought like a man possessed, ducking beneath Menkora's first swing, driving his blade into the exposed side of another rider. Blood sprayed across the sand, dark and steaming. Menkora wheeled his horse, striking at Kamen again and again, but Kamen would not fall. In the chaos, Asetnefer seized a stone and struck one of the guards across the temple, felling him with a strength born of fury and love. In the end, it was not numbers or armor that decided the fight. It was will. Kamen drove Menkora from his saddle, sending the commander crashing to the sand where the desert itself seemed to rise up and swallow him. As silence fell once more over the oasis, broken only by the ragged gasps of the living, Asetnefer ran to Kamen, pressing her forehead to his, feeling the wild, relentless beat of his heart. They had fought the past, and for the first time the future was theirs alone to claim. The sun rose slowly over the oasis, gilding the battered palms and blood-stained sands in soft gold, as if the gods themselves sought to erase the violence of the night with light. Kamen sat by the water's edge, his body bruised and blooded, his broken sword lying across his knees like a relic of another life. Beside him, Asetnefer knelt, binding the worst of his wounds with strips of woven cloth torn from what remained of her black exile robe. In the soft hush of morning, there were no armies, no thrones, no high priests issuing judgment. There was only the slow, sacred rebuilding of life. They buried the fallen beneath cairns of stone, offering no prayers to the gods who had abandoned them, but whispering instead to the desert itself, to the earth that had borne witness to their love and their defiance. Days passed, and the oasis, once a place of refuge, became something more. Kamen raised shelters from palm trunks, strong against the desert winds. Asetnefer planted fig seeds she had carried hidden in her robe's hem, their future a silent rebellion against the barrenness that had been decreed for her. They learned the rhythm of survival together, the gathering of water, the weaving of mats, the simple joy of fish caught from the shallow pools. And slowly, the wounds inside them, deeper than any blade could reach, began to heal. One evening, beneath a sky alight with stars, Kamen led Asetnefer to a smooth, flat stone where he had laid a circle of desert flowers, painstakingly gathered, their petals vivid against the pale rock. He dropped to one knee, not as a soldier, not as a supplicant, but as a man stripped bare by love. "No gods to bless this," he said, voice rough with emotion. "No witnesses but the stars, no kingdom but the one we build with our own hands." Asetnefer, her heart breaking open anew in the best of ways, knelt before him, taking his scarred hands in hers. "Then let the stars hear," she whispered, "and let the earth remember." They sealed their vow with a kiss, not one stolen in shadows or traded in fear, but given freely beneath the endless sky, A kiss that tasted of salt and wind and the raw, fierce promise of forever. Years would pass, and songs would be sung by wandering traders of a hidden oasis where a man and a woman ruled with no crowns but love, no laws but loyalty, no gods but the sky and the river and the beating of their own hearts. Their names would fade from the temples and scrolls of men, but the desert would remember them. The guard who defied kings, the daughter who defied fate, the lovers who built a kingdom where love outlived death itself.